Hello. This talk is called It's Time to Talk. And the talk is about the polarization of society in the United States and in Britain, and what we can do to try and resolve that. It's about the growing divide between different groups of people in America, and it's about the breakdown of consensus. It's about how there are fewer and fewer people inhabiting the center of public discourse, because it's in the center where people can come from more extreme views. They can converge on a center ground, and they can debate their position, and they can compromise and eventually reach agreement. But in America, different groups of people are starting to hold much more extreme views, and they're congregating around the edge, meaning that the space for consensus and agreement is becoming less and less. So the talk is in two parts, and the first will sketch out the problem, and the second will try and identify a solution. In the first part, I'll talk about the polarization that's happening across attitudes towards immigration, race, and also talk about the physical division that's happening and the physical separation that's happening between different groups of people. America is called the United States of America, but of course it's increasingly looking like a disunited States of America, because increasingly there is no cohesive nature to the debate and the conversation that's taking place, because people are beginning to hold such divergent and such polar opposite views. And I'm going to look at how social media accentuates this, because it encourages us to congregate and mix with people who look like us, who feel like us, and who think like us. But if we do that, we're very rarely coming across opinions which we're challenged by, and we're very rarely being put in a place where we have to debate and reach consensus with different types of people. I'm going to talk about the divisions in the United States and then look at one possible model for trying to reach an agreement. And the model that I'll look at will be Colombia. And I'll talk through how over a period of 4 to 5 years, through talking across tables in Havana, that country managed to reach across 50 years of conflict, of anger and animosity, and at least reach an agreement of sorts. So the question for the United States is time running out? Is there time for the United States to have the conversation they need to repair the damage that has been taking place over the last 30 years as people's views and opinions become more extreme and more different from each other? And one of the best examples of this partisan divide is a piece of work done by the Pew Research Center. The Pew Research Center is one of the largest organizations that investigates social attitudes in the United States, and it's been doing it since 1994. And what they've done is they've asked groups of Republicans and Democrats how they feel across a range of different topics. And I'm going to choose 3 to illustrate just how divergent and how different those opinions are becoming. So in 1994, the Pew Research Center asked Republicans and Democrats whether the government should do more to help the needy. In 1994, 40% of Republicans said the government should do more to help the needy. Democrats were asked the same question, and 60% of them said that the government should do more. So there was only a 20-point difference in how Republicans and Democrats felt on this issue. Fast forward to last year, the same question to a similar group of Republicans and Democrats. By now, only 24% of Republicans thought the government should do more. But in contrast, 70% of Democrats thought the government should do more. So what had been a 20-point difference between Republicans and Democrats by last year had become 45 points difference. So the space for an agreement is much, much smaller, and the space for disagreement is becoming more pronounced. Similarly, let's look at attitudes to race. Again, in 1994, different groups of Republicans and Democrats were asked if racial discrimination is the main reason why many black people can't get ahead. Well, 25% of Republicans agreed with that statement in 1994, and 40% of Democrats. So a 15-point difference in how they assessed the impact of race on inequality. Last year, the same question to groups of Republicans and Democrats. By now, only 15% of Republicans think race is an element in preventing black people in America from getting on economically. Conversely, Democrats now feel that 64% of Democrats now feel that race is a key factor in holding back black people in America. So the difference now is a 50-point difference from 15% to 65%. It was 15 points difference in 1994 in terms of what people felt the impact of race was in America. That has grown to 50 points by last year. So again, the space for agreeing on something as fundamental as race relations in the United States has become much, much smaller. Finally, on immigration, the same groups of Republicans and Democrats in 1994 were asked, do immigrants strengthen the country with their hard work and taxes? In 1994, Republicans and Democrats were in pretty much total agreement. 30% of Republicans and Democrats agreed with that statement. So there was very little to distinguish between them. By last year, the difference had become a 40-point difference. 85% of Democrats felt that immigrants did benefit the country. Only 40% of Republicans. So the space for disagreement on something, again, as critical as race relations at a time when President Trump is wishing to build his wall has become even more pronounced. And look at the way people get their news, and look at how it influences what people think and how they feel about these kinds of issues. So a poll taken last year by another large media organization in America called Survey Nation looked at how Democrats and Republicans respond to a news source as a trusted deliverer of news versus President Trump. And so they asked Republicans, would you be more likely to trust President Trump or CNN, the news channel? Well, 90% of Republicans said they would trust President Trump over what they heard on CNN. They asked Democrats the same question. 95% of Democrats said they would believe CNN over President Trump. So, at a time when you have something like the Russian inquiry happening in America, and President Trump is appealing over the heads of news networks via Twitter, you can see how there are two completely different factions in the United States in terms of what they believe. 90% of Republicans will believe Trump over a news source like CNN. 95% of Democrats will believe the CNN over President Trump. So how can they reach agreement if there are such extreme views being taken and such extreme positions being taken? And the worry is that it isn't just about attitudes, it's also about geography. Because a report last year by the Economic Innovation Group looked at where jobs were being created across the United States. And they did it in fine detail, county by county. And what they found was that all the best jobs were being created in places like Texas, Miami, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. Those are all cities that are around the edges of America, on the coastal east and west coast, and in the southern states like Texas and Florida. The places where there were fewer jobs and the places where people had fewer opportunities were in the old Midwestern and Northeastern industrial powerhouses. And why this is significant is because that is a geographical distance which is also becoming associated with a political difference, because increasingly Democrats are piling up votes and support in those coastal cities around the fringes of America, and Republicans are piling up support in the old middle ground of America, in the Midwest. And so Americans are actually dividing by political opinion. And you not only have groups holding very extreme views at the edge, but you actually have people migrating physically to different parts of the country. And of course, this is mirrored in politics. The center ground in American politics has all but disappeared since the Clinton Democrats. Newt Gingrich weaponized politics in the 1990s, and now you have a scenario where there is almost no common ground for the Republicans and Democrats to meet in the center and have a negotiated settlement. And what blame might we attach to social media in all of this? Well, the problem with social media, of course, is that the kind of algorithms that are created tend to provide people with opinions that they're going to welcome. And they provide them with an echo chamber. And hence, they end up listening to people who sound like them, who look like them, and who will agree with them. And it filters out an opportunity to debate your views or to have your views challenged. A very good piece of research by the Wall Street Journal last year looked at what liberal and conservative groups were reading on a range of issues like President Trump, abortion, gun control. And of course, they found that liberals were being served a totally different diet of stories and views around those topics from the kind of views that were being served to conservative readers of Facebook. So, does Facebook have a social responsibility to not just present different groups with opinions that validate their own, that encourage them to think that theirs is the right position? Or does Facebook have a responsibility to create an algorithm which creates more debate, even dissent, as a route through to agreement? The problem with these social media filter bubbles is that they're like walled gardens, and they protect the people inside them. And it's a cozy relationship that you can have with people who look and think like you. But if there's another group over here with a different set of opinions, how are we going to create a bridge between those walled gardens and allow debate and a negotiated settlement to happen? Well, one example might be what happened in Colombia. It had to overcome 50 years of civil war, and they decided that what they would do is that they would bring all of the groups involved in that war to Havana, which was a neutral position, and they invited the FARC left-wing insurgents. The Colombian government were obviously represented. Victims of violence were represented, and those were victims of all kinds of violence in Colombia, from the army to FARC, from narco cartels to right-wing militias. And what they did was they sat down for 4 years opposite each other. FARC guerrilla commandos opposite Colombian army generals, who had previously only ever met on a battlefield, were now sitting opposite each other. And in the course of a documentary that I was filming, we interviewed 30 people who were in those talks. And they talked about the insults, they talked about the anger, they talked about the raised voices. And we heard about how FARC at one point were on the verge of ending all discussions. And another point, how the Colombian government had all their bags packed and were on their way to the airport, only to be called back by moderators who said, "We've done a lot of the hard work and we can't give up now." So the importance of what happened there was that they took the time to talk. And they took the time to reach across 50 years of anger and animosity and disagreement to negotiate the really hard things that were driving them apart. But let's remember, this wasn't a deal that was done in a TV studio or on Twitter. It was done with physical proximity. It was done in touching distance of each other. And Carlos Lozada, one of the FARC commanders, told us what it was like to be in that kind of environment. And he said, in a negotiating table, it allows you to have a huge capacity for tolerance and understanding, and to look for a rapprochement with the ideas of the other side. It's a huge exercise in patience, in self-control, and most of all, in analytical capacity to try to understand how the other side thinks. It's very demanding from the point of view of reasoning. So that gives you an insight into what is involved to reach an agreement after so many years of disagreement and discord. And that's what it took in this case to reach across a divide of 50 years. And it wasn't just the talking that they did in Havana. They also organized a whole series of different reconciliation events in Colombia, which gave an opportunity for victims to meet the perpetrators of violence, and for those perpetrators of violence to ask for the forgiveness of the victims. And that was always going to be a really crucial part of that negotiated settlement, because it gave people, again, an opportunity to meet with people face to face and to allow them to express whatever residual feelings of anger or remorse that they still had. And so at a time when the United States is increasingly divided on issues like race and immigration, on abortion and gun control, how is it going to reach a negotiated settlement to try and resolve those issues? And I started in the United States, and I'll finish there, because I don't think that Donald Trump is the cause of the political and economic polarization in that country. That has been developing for over 40 years, and it's developed because the fruits of the economic well-being haven't been distributed fairly, and large numbers of people in the United States have felt as though nobody has been listening to them, while a small number of people in the United States did very well. A large number were going backwards economically, but nobody was listening to them. Nobody took the time to talk to them. And I believe the result of 18 months ago was their attempt to say, we have a voice, we will be heard, and we've been overlooked for too long. And so if the discord and disagreement and polarization in America has been 40 years in the making, then how long will it be for them to find an answer and to reach an agreement? And the question, I suppose, is the United States running out of time to reach that agreement? Which is why the answer has to be, it's time to talk.